I told my wife's brother who lives with us that he had to decrease his expenses and pay some bills if he wanted to stay living with us. When I came back that night, my wife threw my clothes on the couch and told me to spend the night there. Think about how you treat my brother, she said. So I did. And next morning, the parking lot at Stratton Dynamics was damn near empty by the time I clocked out. Just my beat-up Silverado and a couple other trucks belonging to the night shift guys. Another 12-hour day in the books, and honestly, all I wanted was to get home, grab a beer, and maybe catch the tail end of whatever game was on. Simple stuff, you know? The kind of evening that makes all the overtime worth it. My name's Reed Wallace, and at 37, I've got this whole adulting thing figured out, or at least I thought I did. I'm a shift supervisor at Stratton, which basically means I babysit grown men who operate heavy machinery and somehow still manage to screw up the simplest tasks. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and then some. Columbus, Ohio isn't exactly a hotbed of opportunity, but manufacturing keeps this city running, and I've carved out my little piece of the pie. The drive home took me through the usual neighborhoods, past the McDonald's where high school kids work their first jobs, past the gas station where I grab my morning coffee, past the strip mall that's been under renovation for 3 years now. 22 minutes door to door, enough time to decompress and shift gears from supervisor mode to husband mode. At least, that's how it used to work. I pulled into our driveway. Well, my driveway, since I'm the one making the mortgage payments, and noticed the porch light was off. Weird. Talia always kept it on when she knew I was working late. The house looked darker than usual, like nobody was home, but her car was right there in the garage. Maybe she'd gone to bed early. Hell, maybe that meant I'd actually get some quiet time to myself. I fumbled with my keys at the front door, already mentally planning my evening. Beer, leftover pizza, maybe scroll through Netflix until my eyes got heavy. But the second I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The living room felt different, like the energy had shifted somehow. And then I saw them. My clothes. Every damn piece of clothing I owned, dumped on our couch like I was some kind of vagrant who'd overstayed his welcome. Work shirts, jeans, underwear, socks, everything just piled up in a wrinkled heap. For a second, I thought maybe Talia was doing laundry and had run out of room to fold stuff. But no, this wasn't folding. This was dumping. This was making a point. What the hell? I muttered, dropping my lunch cooler by the door. The sound echoed through the house, and that's when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Talia appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, arms crossed, that look on her face that I'd been seeing more and more lately. Not angry, exactly, but cold. Disappointed. Like I'd failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. She was still in her scrubs from the dental office where she worked part-time, her blonde hair pulled back in that messy bun she always wore when she was stressed. "Think about how you treat my brother," she said. And man, those 8 words hit me like a punch to the gut. Her brother, Griffin, the 34-year-old man-child who'd been camping out in our spare bedroom for over a year now, treating our house like his personal hotel and me like his personal ATM. The same Griffin who'd been living rent-free, bill-free, responsibility-free while I busted my ass pulling extra shifts to keep up with the increased expenses. The same Griffin who I'd had a perfectly reasonable conversation with that morning about maybe, just maybe, contributing something to the household. "Talia, what's this about?" I asked, gesturing at the clothes mountain on our couch. I just asked him to help out a little. "We talked about this." She shook her head like I was missing the point entirely. "He's family, Reed. He's going through a tough time, and instead of being supportive, you're treating him like some kind of burden." Family. Right. Funny how family always seemed to work one way in this house. Griffin was family when he needed a place to crash, family when he needed money, family when he needed someone to cover for him. But what about me? What about the guy who worked 60-hour weeks to keep the lights on? What about the husband who'd been slowly watching his marriage turn into a boarding house where his opinion mattered less and less? "So this is my punishment?" I asked, pointing at the couch. "I sleep here because I had the audacity to suggest your grown-ass brother maybe chip in for groceries once in a while." The look she gave me could have frozen hell over. "Maybe some time on the couch will help you think about your priorities." And just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in my own living room like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. I heard her bedroom door, our bedroom door, close with a definitive click, followed by the sound of the lock turning. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my clothes, trying to process what had just happened. In 15 years of marriage, we'd had our fights, sure. But this felt different. This felt like a line had been crossed, and I wasn't entirely sure which one of us had crossed it. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Griffin's video games coming from upstairs. Of course he was gaming. It was Tuesday night, which meant it was just like Monday night and Sunday night and pretty much every other night since he'd moved in. While I was at work, while Talia was at work, while the rest of the world was out there grinding and trying to make something of themselves, Griffin was upstairs in our spare bedroom, living like he was still 15 years old. I picked up one of my work shirts from the pile, shook it out, and hung it over the back of the couch. Then another, and another. If this was going to be my bed for the night, I might as well make it as comfortable as possible. But as I folded and organized, my mind kept racing back to that morning's conversation with Griffin. All I'd done was sit him down with my coffee and ask him to step up. Maybe get a job, any job. Maybe help with the electric bill that had doubled since he moved in with all his electronics. Maybe just acknowledge that he was a grown man living in someone else's house. But he'd laughed it off like I was joking, like the idea of contributing to the household he was draining was some kind of absurd suggestion. And now here I was, banished to my own couch, being told to think about my priorities. Well, I thought as I settled in for what was sure to be an uncomfortable night, maybe I would think about my priorities. Maybe it was time to really examine what the hell had happened to my life, my marriage, and my home. Maybe it was time to figure out how I'd become a guest in my own house. The couch creaked under my weight as I stretched out, and upstairs, Griffin's game got louder. Somewhere down the hall, my wife was probably already asleep, comfortable in our bed while I lay here surrounded by my own clothes like some kind of domestic refugee. Yeah, I'd think about my priorities all right. Starting tonight. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The couch cushions had seen better days. Hell, we bought this thing when we first got married, back when we thought hand-me-down furniture was charming instead of just cheap. Now, 15 years later, the springs were shot, and there was a permanent dent where I usually sat to watch TV. Lying on it was like trying to sleep in a hammock made of concrete. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the mental marathon my brain decided to run at 2 in the morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the last 15 months, trying to figure out exactly when I'd become the bad guy in my own house. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except I was both the conductor and the guy tied to the tracks. Griffin had shown up on our doorstep in March of last year, looking like a kicked puppy with 2 garbage bags full of clothes and a sob story about his ex-girlfriend Melanie. She'd apparently had enough of his bullshit and given him the boot from their apartment in Akron. At the time, I actually felt sorry for the guy. Breakups suck, even when you're 34 and should probably have your life figured out by now. Just until I get back on my feet, he'd said, standing in our entryway with those puppy dog eyes that ran in Talia's family. Maybe a month, tops. Famous last words, right there. The first few weeks weren't terrible. Griffin helped around the house, did some dishes, even mowed the lawn once without being asked. He talked about job hunting, updating his resume, getting his life back together. Talia was happy to have her little brother around. They'd always been close, especially after their parents died in that car accident 5 years back. And me? I was trying to be the supportive brother-in-law, the good guy who steps up when family needs help. But somewhere around week 6, things started to shift. The job applications became less frequent. The help around the house dried up completely. Griffin discovered our Netflix password and apparently decided that binge-watching every series ever made was a full-time occupation. He claimed the guest bedroom like he was planting a flag on the moon, moving in his gaming setup, his mini-fridge, his collection of action figures that he was definitely too old for. By month 3, I was starting to ask questions. Gentle ones at first. How's the job search going? Maybe we should update your resume. Have you thought about expanding your search radius? Griffin always had an answer. The market was tough. He was being picky because he wanted to find the right fit. He was taking some time to work on himself first. All reasonable-sounding excuses that added up to a whole lot of nothing. Month 6 was when the utilities started spiking. Our electric bill jumped from around $150 to nearly $300. The guy was running his gaming rig 12 hours a day, had that mini fridge humming constantly, and apparently believed that 68 degrees was the only acceptable temperature for his personal comfort. When I brought it up to Talia, she brushed it off. It's just temporary, Reed. He'll be out of here soon. Month 9 was when I noticed my tools going missing. Nothing expensive, just little stuff. Screwdrivers, wrenches, my good measuring tape. I'd find them later, scattered around Griffin's room or left outside after he'd used them for whatever project he was half-heartedly working on. When I asked him about it, he acted like borrowing someone's tools without asking was perfectly normal. Oh, that's where that went. I was wondering where I put it. By month 12, Griffin had settled into a routine that would make a house cat jealous. Sleep until noon, game until dinner, eat whatever Talia cooked, then game until 3 in the morning. Rinse and repeat. He'd given up even pretending to look for work. His latest excuse was that he was exploring entrepreneurship, which apparently involved watching YouTube videos about cryptocurrency and day trading while eating my food and using my Wi-Fi. The food situation was its own special kind of hell. This guy could put away groceries like he was prepping for hibernation. I'd come home from work to find the leftovers I'd been looking forward to completely gone. The snacks I'd bought for my lunch breaks at work vanished. The good coffee I splurged on because it was one of my few simple pleasures. Griffin would brew pot after pot, leaving the machine on all day and burning through my expensive beans like they were free samples at Costco. And through it all, Talia defended him. Every complaint I raised was met with the same responses. He's family. He's been through a lot. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything. As if I hadn't been working my ass off to make sure we didn't lose everything ourselves. The phone bill was another kick in the teeth. Griffin had somehow convinced Talia to add him to our family plan temporarily. That was 8 months ago. Now I was paying an extra $40 a month for him to spend all day on social media and gaming forums, complaining about how hard life was and how nobody understood his struggle. But the real kicker was watching him interact with our neighbors. Mrs. Peterson next door thought Griffin was just the sweetest young man, always available to help her carry in groceries or move furniture. What she didn't know was that he was using my truck to do it, burning my gas and racking up miles on my vehicle while I was at work. He'd somehow positioned himself as this helpful, available guy in the neighborhood while I was busting my ass to pay for the privilege of letting him play house. The breaking point should have come months earlier, but I kept thinking things would change. I kept believing Talia when she said it was temporary. I kept hoping Griffin would wake up one morning with some motivation, some sense of responsibility, some basic understanding that he was a grown man living off his sister and her husband's generosity. Instead, I got 15 months of watching a man-child turn my house into his personal playground while my wife made excuses and I footed the bill. 15 months of feeling like a stranger in my own home, walking on eggshells to avoid being labeled as unsupportive or cruel. 15 months of working overtime to subsidize someone else's extended vacation from adulthood. Lying there on that lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling and listening to Griffin's game still going strong upstairs at 2:30 in the morning, I finally admitted something to myself that I'd been avoiding for way too long. I wasn't helping Griffin by enabling his lifestyle. I wasn't being a good husband by letting Talia's guilt manipulate me into accepting the unacceptable. And I sure as hell wasn't being a good man by continuing to tolerate being treated like a walking ATM in my own home. That night wasn't the first time I'd felt like a guest in my own house, but it was definitely the first time I decided I was done checking into Hotel Griffin. Something had to change, and since nobody else seemed interested in changing anything, I guess it was going to have to be me. I remember that March evening like it was yesterday, probably because it was the moment my life started its slow slide into chaos, though I didn't know it at the time. Talia and I were sitting at the kitchen table, finishing up dinner, some kind of chicken casserole she'd thrown together after her shift at Dr. Morrison's dental practice. We were talking about normal stuff, you know? Whether we should finally replace the garbage disposal that had been making that grinding noise for months, what we wanted to do for our anniversary in June, whether the Buckeyes had any shot at a decent season. Then her phone rang. I could tell from the way her face changed that it was Griffin. She always got this look when her little brother called. Part concern, part guilt, like she was already preparing to fix whatever mess he'd gotten himself into this time. She stepped into the living room to take the call, and I could hear bits and pieces of the conversation through the thin walls of our ranch house. What happened? Are you okay? She did what? Oh, Griffin, I'm so sorry. 20 minutes later, She came back to the kitchen with tears in her eyes and that determined look she got when she'd already made up her mind about something. That should have been my first warning sign, but hindsight's 2020, right? Melanie kicked Griffin out, she said, sitting back down across from me. Just like that. Came home from work and found all his stuff in garbage bags on the front porch. I set down my fork and looked at her. Griffin had been dating Melanie for about 3 years, living in her apartment in Akron for the last 2. From what I'd heard, she had a decent job at some insurance company and seemed like she had her head screwed on straight. If she'd kicked Griffin out, there was probably a damn good reason for it. What did he do? I asked, because let's be honest, Griffin didn't have the best track record when it came to personal responsibility. Nothing, Talia said, a little too quickly. She just decided she wanted to focus on herself, or whatever. You know how women can be sometimes. I raised an eyebrow at that. My wife had just thrown her entire gender under the bus to defend her brother, which told me everything I needed to know about how objective she was being about this situation. But I didn't push it. Not then. Okay, so what's he going to do? Get his own place? Talia looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring the way she always did when she was nervous. Well, that's the thing. He doesn't really have anywhere to go right now. His lease was in Melanie's name, and he's been between jobs for a while. Of course he had. Griffin was always between jobs. In the 5 years I'd known him, he'd worked at a dozen different places: warehouse work, retail, food service, even a brief stint at a car dealership that ended when he got caught sleeping in the break room during his shift. He was like a professional job hopper, always convinced that the next opportunity would be his big break, never sticking around long enough to actually build anything. So he wants to crash here, I said. It wasn't a question. Just for a few weeks, Reed, she said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Just until he gets back on his feet. You know he's had a rough time since Mom and Dad died. This breakup is just another blow, and he needs family right now. There it was. The family card. Talia's parents had been killed by a drunk driver 5 years earlier, and Griffin had taken it hard. Hell, we all had. They were good people. Her dad worked construction. Her mom was a nurse at the children's hospital. They'd raised their kids to be decent human beings, though somewhere along the way, Griffin seemed to have missed that particular lesson. I looked at my wife's face, saw the hope and desperation there, and felt my resolve start to crumble. This was the woman I'd loved for 15 years, asking me to help her brother in his time of need. How could I say no to that? What kind of husband would that make me? A few weeks, I said finally. And he's got to be actively looking for work. I'm not running a charity here. The relief on Talia's face was immediate and overwhelming. She squeezed my hand tight and leaned across the table to kiss me. Thank you, baby. I know this isn't ideal, but it's just temporary. He'll be out of here before you know it. Famous last words, right there. Griffin showed up the next evening with his 2 garbage bags and a cardboard box full of what looked like random electronics. He was all smiles and gratitude, shaking my hand and calling me brother like we were old war buddies instead of in-laws who barely knew each other. He seemed genuinely appreciative, promising to pull his weight around the house and find a job as quickly as possible. I really can't thank you guys enough, he said, standing in our entryway with his pathetic collection of belongings. This is just what I needed to get back on track. A few weeks to clear my head and figure out my next move. Talia beamed at him like he was a war hero returning home. That's what family is for, Griff. We stick together. I helped him carry his stuff to the guest bedroom, the room we'd always talked about turning into a home office someday. It was small but comfortable, with a twin bed left over from when Talia's cousin had stayed with us a few summers back, a dresser, and a decent-sized closet. Nothing fancy, but more than adequate for a temporary arrangement. This is perfect, Griffin said, looking around the room like it was a suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I'll try to stay out of your hair as much as possible. You won't even know I'm here. Another famous last words moment, though I didn't realize it at the time. That first week was actually pretty decent. Griffin helped with dishes, took out the trash without being asked, even made breakfast for all of us one morning. He talked constantly about job applications he was filling out, interviews he was hoping to land, his plan to get his own apartment within the month. Talia was happy. I was feeling good about doing the right thing, and Griffin seemed motivated to turn his life around. But that second week, things started to shift. The job hunting became less urgent. The help around the house became more sporadic. Griffin discovered our cable package included about 1,000 channels he'd never had access to, and suddenly he was an expert on everything from cooking shows to true crime documentaries. By week 3, I was starting to ask gentle questions. How many applications had he submitted? Had he heard back from any of the places he'd applied? Maybe he should consider expanding his search radius, or looking into temp agencies, or just taking whatever he could find to get some money coming in. Griffin always had reasonable-sounding answers. The job market was tougher than he'd expected. He was being selective because he wanted to find something with growth potential. He was taking a little time to work on himself after the traumatic breakup with Melanie. And Talia? She backed him up every time. Give him space, Reed. He's been through a lot. Rushing him isn't going to help anybody. By week 6, a few weeks had become just a little longer, and Griffin had settled into our guest room like he was planning to run for mayor of it. His 2 garbage bags had been replaced by a full wardrobe. The cardboard box of electronics had evolved into a complete gaming setup that rivaled anything you'd find at Best Buy. But I kept telling myself it was temporary. Talia kept assuring me it was temporary. Griffin kept promising it was temporary. 15 months later, lying on my own couch like a refugee in my own home, I finally understood that temporary is just another word for until you grow a backbone and do something about it. 3 nights before I found myself banished to the couch, I came home from work to find a stack of credit card statements on the kitchen counter. This wasn't unusual. Talia always handled the bills, and she liked to spread everything out on the table to organize payments. What was unusual was the look on her face when I walked in. She was pale, almost green around the gills, holding one particular statement like it had personally insulted her mother. "We need to talk," she said, which is never what you want to hear when you've just worked a 12-hour shift and all you want is a beer and some leftover pizza. I dropped my lunch cooler by the door and grabbed a Bud Light from the fridge. "What's up?" "Late fees again. We'd been cutting it close on a few bills lately. What with the increased utilities and grocery costs that seemed to magically appear when Griffin moved in." She slid the Visa statement across the table toward me, pointing at a section she'd highlighted in yellow. "Look at this." I squinted at the small print, trying to focus after a day of staring at machinery and work orders. There it was, plain as day, a series of charges to various restaurants and food delivery services. DoorDash, Grubhub, some local Chinese place, a pizza joint I'd never heard of. The dates were all from the previous week, when both Talia and I had been at work. $187, I said, the number hitting me like a slap in the face. "In 1 week. I didn't order any of this," Talia said quietly. "Did you?" I looked at the charges again, adding them up in my head. $43 from that fancy Thai place downtown. $52 from some barbecue joint that probably charged $20 for a sandwich. $38 from a sushi restaurant that I couldn't even pronounce the name of. This wasn't just grabbing a quick bite. This was someone living like they had unlimited funds to blow on gourmet takeout. "Griffin," I said, and it wasn't a question. Talia nodded miserably. "I found the credit card in his room when I was putting away laundry. It was just sitting on his dresser next to his gaming controller. My credit card. The one I used for emergencies and online purchases. The one I kept in my wallet except when I occasionally left it on my nightstand after ordering something. The same nightstand that was about 10 feet away from the guest bathroom that Griffin used several times a day. I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest. The same feeling I got when some jackass at work tried to blame me for their screw-up. But this was different. This was personal. This was my own home, my own family, my own fucking credit card being used to subsidize someone else's restaurant tour of Columbus. "Where is he?" I asked, standing up from the table. "Reed, just calm down. Let's think about how to handle this." "I am calm," I said, though my voice was getting louder. "I just want to know where your brother is so I can ask him about these charges." Griffin wasn't hard to find. He was exactly where he always was at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, upstairs in the guest room, headset on, yelling at some 12-year-old on the other side of the country about strategy in whatever game was consuming his life that week. I knocked on the door frame since the door was open, and he held up one finger like I was interrupting something important. "Yeah, hold on guys, my brother-in-law wants something," he said into his headset, like I was some kind of inconvenience for existing in my own house. I waited and waited. Finally, After another 30 seconds of him explaining to his online buddies why he needed to pause their very important digital war, he pulled off his headset and spun around in the gaming chair I'd bought him for Christmas. "What's up, Reed?" I held up the credit card statement. "Want to explain these charges?" He glanced at the paper, and I watched his face go through about 6 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, guilt, and then something that looked almost like defiance. "Oh shit, dude, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot I had that card." "You forgot you had my credit card?" "It was just sitting there on your dresser, and I needed to order some food. I was going to pay you back as soon as I got some cash." "Some cash from where, Griffin? You don't have a job." He shrugged, like this was all just a minor miscommunication between reasonable adults. "I've got some stuff I'm selling online. eBay, Facebook Marketplace. Should have the money by the end of the week." I looked around his room, at the 50-inch TV I'd helped him mount on the wall, at the gaming setup that probably cost more than my truck, at the mini fridge humming in the corner, stocked with energy drinks and fancy sodas that definitely weren't part of our grocery budget. "You've been selling stuff online for 8 months, I said. "When exactly is this money going to materialize?" "Look," I said I was sorry. "It was an honest mistake." An honest mistake. $187 in restaurant delivery was an honest mistake. Using someone else's credit card without permission was an honest mistake. Living in someone else's house for over a year without contributing a dime was probably just a series of honest mistakes. "Griffin, you can't just..." "Reed, let it go." I turned around to find Talia standing in the doorway, arms crossed, giving me that look again. The same look I'd been getting more and more lately whenever I had the audacity to address any of Griffin's behavior. "Let it go." I stared at my wife. "He stole my credit card and spent almost $200 on takeout." "He didn't steal it," she said. "It was just an accident. He's going to pay it back." Griffin nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. End of the week, I'll have your money." I looked back and forth between them, my wife defending her brother making promises he had no intention of keeping, both of them treating me like I was the unreasonable one for being upset about credit card fraud in my own home. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Griffin, you're 34 years old. You can't just take other people's credit cards and go on a spending spree." "It wasn't a spree," Griffin said, laughing like this was all just a big joke. "It was just a few meals." "Chill out, man. Chill out." This freeloading man-child who'd been living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities, and apparently stealing my credit card to order gourmet takeout, was telling me to chill out. "You know what?" I said, looking directly at Talia. "We need to have a family meeting. Tonight. All 3 of us. About expenses, about expectations, about what's going to change around here." Talia's face went cold. "You want to have a meeting about my brother?" "I want to have a meeting about our household finances and who's contributing what." "Griffin's been here over a year, Talia. It's time for him to start pulling his weight or find somewhere else to live." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Griffin looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. Talia stared at me like I'd just suggested we sacrifice her brother to the gods of fiscal responsibility. "I can't believe you're threatening to kick out my brother over a mistake," she said finally. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm trying to have an adult conversation about our marriage and our finances." "Fine," she said. "We'll have your meeting. But don't expect me to sit there while you attack my family." That night, over a dinner that none of us really ate, I laid out a budget on the kitchen table. I showed them exactly how much our expenses had increased since Griffin moved in. I presented a reasonable plan for him to contribute to the household, either through employment or by helping with bills. I spoke calmly, rationally, like the mature adult I was trying to be. Griffin laughed in my face. Not a chuckle, not a nervous laugh, but a full-on belly laugh like I just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Dude, you're seriously going to nickel and dime me over utilities?" he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "I'm family. And Talia, my wife of 15 years, the woman who'd promised to be my partner through thick and thin, she told me I was being cruel to her brother. She said I was trying to control everyone in the house. She said maybe I needed some time to think about what kind of man I wanted to be. That's when she told me to sleep on the couch." As I lay there that first night, staring at the ceiling and listening to Griffin's games still going strong upstairs, I realized something that should have been obvious months earlier. I wasn't the problem in this equation. I was just the only one trying to solve it. 3 o'clock in the morning is a strange time to have a moment of clarity, but that's exactly when it hit me. I'd been lying on that lumpy couch for hours, tossing and turning, trying to find a position that didn't make my back feel like it was being twisted into a pretzel. The house was finally quiet. Griffin had shut down his gaming marathon around 2:30, probably after losing one too many matches and rage-quitting like the overgrown child he was. I gave up on sleep and padded into the kitchen in my boxers and an old Buckeyes t-shirt, the hardwood floor cold under my bare feet. The coffee maker sat there like an old friend, reliable and uncomplicated, unlike everything else in my life lately. I scooped out enough grounds for a strong pot and listened to the familiar gurgling sounds as it brewed. There's something about making coffee at 3 in the morning that feels almost rebellious, like you're stealing time from the universe. I settled at the kitchen table with my steaming mug, the same table where I'd tried to have that rational conversation about finances just hours earlier. The same table where Griffin had laughed in my face and Talia had made me out to be some kind of villain for expecting basic adult behavior from a 34-year-old man. The house felt different in the darkness. Quieter, more honest somehow. Without all the daytime noise and drama, I could actually think clearly for the first time in months. And what I was thinking wasn't pretty. This wasn't my home anymore. Somehow, without me even noticing it happening, I'd become a tenant in my own house. Worse than a tenant. Actually, tenants have rights. I was more like a live-in sponsor, funding someone else's lifestyle while being told I should be grateful for the privilege. I took a sip of coffee and looked around the kitchen. My kitchen, the one I'd saved up for 3 years to renovate, where I'd installed the cabinets myself, working weekends and evenings until my hands were raw and my back was screaming. The same kitchen where Griffin now helped himself to whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it, like it was his personal restaurant. Upstairs, I could hear the familiar sounds of the house settling, creaking floorboards, the whisper of air through the vents, the distant hum of Griffin's mini-fridge keeping his energy drinks at the perfect temperature. Even in sleep, the guy was costing me money. That's when I noticed something I'd somehow missed during all the chaos of the evening. Sitting on the counter, partially hidden behind the toaster, was a stack of unopened mail. Bills, mostly, but also what looked like bank statements and credit card offers. Talia usually handled this stuff, but seeing it there in the dim light from the stove hood, I felt a sudden urge to know exactly how deep in the hole we were. I flipped through the stack, my coffee growing cold as I absorbed the numbers. The electric bill was even higher than I'd thought, $312 for last month. Our internet bill had mysteriously increased too, probably because Griffin had upgraded us to some premium package without asking. The water bill was through the roof, which made sense considering the guy took 45-minute showers like he was trying to personally drain Lake Erie. But it was the bank statement that really got my attention. I stared at the numbers, reading them twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Over the past 6 months, there had been regular cash withdrawals, 50 here, 100 there, sometimes 200 at a time, all from ATMs around town, all on days when I was at work and Talia was supposedly running errands. I did the math in my head, then grabbed a pen and paper to make sure I was right. Nearly $2,000 in cash withdrawals that I didn't remember making, which meant either I was losing my mind, or my wife had been secretly funding her brother's lifestyle while telling me we were tight on cash. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. I sat there in the dark, surrounded by evidence of what felt like a massive betrayal, and tried to remember the last time Talia and I had felt like a team. When was the last time she'd taken my side in an argument? When was the last time she'd treated me like her husband instead of like Griffin's annoying roommate? I couldn't remember. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Not Griffin. His heavy tread was unmistakable. This was lighter, more careful. Talia, probably going to the bathroom or getting a glass of water. For a moment, I thought about going upstairs, confronting her about the withdrawals, demanding answers about where our money was going. But then I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. I already knew where the money was going. I knew who was making the withdrawals. I knew why she'd been so defensive about Griffin's lack of contribution to the household. And most importantly, I knew that confronting her about it would just result in more gaslighting, more excuses, more reasons why I was the problem for not being understanding enough. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen and made a different kind of plan. I thought about my buddy Jake from work, who'd gone through his own messy situation with his ex-wife's deadbeat brother. The thing about enablers, he told me over beers one night, is that they'll always choose the person who needs them most. And parasites always need more than providers. At the time, I thought he was being cynical. Now, sitting in my dark kitchen at 3:30 in the morning, I realized he was just being realistic. Griffin needed Talia to defend him, to make excuses for him, to fund his lifestyle and protect him from consequences. What did I need her for? To work hard, pay bills, and shut up about it? Any roommate could do that. Hell, most roommates would actually contribute to expenses. I pulled out my phone and started browsing apartment listings. Not seriously, just out of curiosity. What would it cost to rent a one-bedroom place in a decent part of town? What would my monthly expenses look like if I wasn't subsidizing a grown man's extended vacation from responsibility? The numbers were surprisingly reasonable. Actually, they were more than reasonable. They were liberating. Without Griffin's expenses dragging us down, without the constant drama and tension, without feeling like a stranger in my own home, I could actually afford to live pretty comfortably on my own. I bookmarked a few listings and closed the browser, but the seed was planted. For the first time in over a year, I glimpsed what my life could look like without the chaos, without the disrespect, without being treated like a wallet with legs. The coffee was stone cold by now, but I didn't care. I sat there until the sun started creeping through the kitchen blinds, thinking about possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider before. Not revenge fantasies or dramatic gestures, just practical questions about what my life could look like if I stopped accepting the unacceptable. When I finally heard Griffin's alarm go off upstairs. Yeah, he set an alarm. He just didn't use it to get up and look for work. I was still sitting at the table, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or confused or desperate to fix things. I was just done. Done being disrespected in my own home. Done funding someone else's lifestyle while being told I was selfish for expecting basic consideration. Done being married to someone who treated me like a necessary evil instead of a partner. I was done, and for the first time in months, that felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. I must have dozed off at the kitchen table sometime around 5, because the next thing I knew, Talia's alarm was blaring upstairs and sunlight was streaming through the blinds. My neck felt like someone had used it for batting practice, and there was a coffee mug ring permanently etched into my forearm from where I'd been resting it on the table. But my head was clearer than it had been in months. Talia came downstairs around 6:30, already dressed for work in her blue scrubs, hair pulled back in that messy bun that used to make me smile, but now just looked tired. She paused when she saw me sitting at the table, surrounded by bank statements and bills, and I could see her brain trying to calculate exactly how much trouble she was in. "Morning," she said carefully, like she was testing the waters to see if I was still the angry guy from last night, or if we were going to pretend everything was normal again. "Morning," I replied, my voice neutral. No hostility, no warmth, just acknowledgement that she'd spoken. She moved around the kitchen with studied casualness, making her coffee, grabbing a granola bar from the cabinet, checking her phone. But I could feel her stealing glances at me, trying to read my mood, waiting for me to either explode or apologize. I did neither. "So," she said finally, leaning against the counter with her travel mug, "are we going to talk about last night?" I looked up from the bank statement I'd been studying. "Actually, yes. I took the day off. I think we need to have a real conversation about our marriage." The color drained from her face. In 15 years together, I'd never taken a day off to talk about our relationship. Sick days, sure. Vacation days, absolutely. But a we need to talk day? That was uncharted territory, and we both knew it. "Read, if this is about Griffin. It's about us, Talia. It's about whether we're still married or if I'm just a roommate who pays the bills while you take care of your brother." She set down her coffee mug harder than necessary. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I spread the bank statements across the table like I was dealing cards. $2,000 in cash withdrawals over the past 6 months. Want to tell me where that money went? The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I watched her face cycle through the same expressions Griffin had shown when I confronted him about the credit card: surprise, recognition, guilt, and then something that looked like defiance. "I don't have to justify every penny I spend to you," she said finally. "Actually, you do. We're married. It's called financial transparency, and it's kind of a basic requirement when you share a bank account." You're being controlling. I'm being an adult. There's a difference. She grabbed her purse from the counter and headed for the door. I'm not doing this right now. I have to get to work. Then we'll do it tonight, I called after her. When you get home. Just you and me. No Griffin, no excuses. We're going to figure out what kind of marriage we have left. She stopped in the doorway, her back still to me. And if I don't want to have that conversation? The question hung in the air, and I realized this was one of those moments that define everything that comes after. I could back down, apologize for being unreasonable, pretend that everything was fine, and go back to being the walking ATM who slept on the couch. Or I could finally, after 15 months of being disrespected in my own home, draw a line in the sand. Then I guess we'll have our answer about what kind of marriage we have, I said quietly. She turned around then, and I could see something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something that looked almost like fear. Like she was finally realizing that her reliable, stable, always there husband might actually have limits. You're threatening me, she said. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm telling you that I won't keep living like this. I won't keep being treated like a stranger in my own house. I won't keep funding your brother's lifestyle while being told I'm selfish for expecting basic respect. So what? You want me to choose between you and my brother? The way she said it, like it was the most unreasonable request in the world, told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in her priorities. But I answered anyway, because some things need to be said out loud. Yes, Talia, I do. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if this was just another argument that would blow over in a few days. She was waiting for me to back down, to apologize, to be the reasonable one who keeps the peace at any cost. Instead, I just sat there, surrounded by evidence of her financial betrayal, waiting for her answer. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she said finally. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm trying to save our marriage. By making me choose between my husband and my family? Griffin isn't your family, Talia. I am. Or at least, I used to be. She left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I heard her car start in the driveway, then the screech of tires as she backed out too fast and roared down the street toward work. The house fell quiet again, except for the inevitable sounds of Griffin stirring upstairs. I could hear his heavy footsteps as he made his way to the bathroom, then the shower running for what would probably be another 45-minute session. Just another day in paradise for the man who'd never met a consequence he couldn't avoid. I gathered up the bank statements and bills, stacking them neatly in a pile. Then I pulled out my phone and called my supervisor at Stratton. Hey Mike, it's Reed. I need to use a personal day today. Yeah, everything's fine, just some family stuff I need to handle. Thanks, I'll be in tomorrow. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, listening to Griffin's off-key singing echoing from the upstairs bathroom. He was probably using the expensive shampoo I'd bought last week, the stuff I splurged on because it was one of my few small luxuries. By the time he was done, there'd be no hot water left for anyone else, and he'd leave wet towels on the floor for someone else to pick up. But not for much longer. I opened my laptop and started browsing those apartment listings again, this time with serious intent. One-bedroom places in decent neighborhoods, close enough to work that I wouldn't have to change my routine too much. I bookmarked the ones that looked promising and started calculating move-in costs, security deposits, utility transfers. For the first time in over a year, I was making plans that didn't include Griffin. For the first time in months, I was making plans that might not include Talia either. The shower finally shut off upstairs, and I heard Griffin's heavy tread as he made his way back to his room. Probably to fire up his gaming rig and spend another day contributing absolutely nothing to the world while I figured out how to rebuild my life. I looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, the one I'd renovated with my own hands, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, exactly, but the calm that comes from finally making a decision instead of just reacting to everyone else's choices. Tonight, when Talia came home, we'd have that conversation. She'd either choose to be my wife again, or she'd choose to keep enabling her brother. Either way, I'd finally have my answer. And either way, I'd know what to do next. After Talia left for work, I decided to do something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I went through our financial records with a fine-tooth comb. Not snooping. Exactly, since it was all our joint stuff anyway, but really digging into the details, I'd always been content to let her handle. She was good with money, or at least I'd always thought she was. Turns out there's a difference between being good with money and being good at hiding where money goes. I spread everything out on the dining room table like I was conducting a forensic audit. Bank statements going back 8 months, credit card bills, utility records, even receipts I found stuffed in the junk drawer. Griffin was still upstairs doing whatever it is that unemployed 34-year-olds do at 10 in the morning, probably watching YouTube videos about cryptocurrency or arguing with teenagers in gaming forums. The pattern became clear pretty quickly once I knew what to look for. Every month, right after my paycheck got deposited, there'd be a series of ATM withdrawals. Never huge amounts, 50 here, 100 there, sometimes 200 on the days when I worked late and wouldn't be home until after dark. The withdrawals were spread out over different ATMs around town, like she was deliberately trying to make them look random. But they weren't random. They were systematic, calculated, and they added up to way more than I'd initially thought. I pulled out a calculator and started adding up the numbers, month by month. March, when Griffin first moved in, $300 in unexplained cash withdrawals. April, $425. May, $380. By the time I got to the most recent statement, we were looking at $600 in a single month. Over the past 15 months, Talia had quietly drained over $5,800 from our joint account. Nearly $6,000. That was a vacation. That was a new roof. That was my truck payment for an entire year. That was the money I'd been putting aside to finally replace the water heater that had been making that wheezing sound for the past 2 years. I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers I'd written on a legal pad, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just about enabling Griffin anymore. This was about fundamental dishonesty in our marriage. While I was picking up extra shifts and putting off buying new work boots because money was tight, my wife was secretly funding her brother's lifestyle to the tune of nearly $400 a month. The really sick part was how she'd managed to make me feel guilty about it. All those conversations about cutting back on expenses, about being more careful with spending, about how we needed to watch our budget. Meanwhile, she was literally handing cash to Griffin while telling me we couldn't afford to go out to dinner anymore. I started cross-referencing the withdrawal dates with my work schedule, and sure enough, they almost always happened when I was at the plant. Talia would run errands, grocery shopping, trips to the pharmacy, visits to her cousin across town. Except now I knew what those errands really were. Trips to the ATM to fund Griffin's extended vacation from responsibility. The grocery bills made sense now too. I'd been wondering why our food costs had nearly doubled even though we weren't eating any differently. Turns out we weren't just feeding Griffin. We were probably funding his takeout habit too. Cash withdrawals to give him spending money, credit card charges for his restaurant orders, and regular grocery bills to keep him fed when he was too lazy to order delivery. I found receipts for things I'd never seen in our house. Expensive energy drinks, premium beer, those fancy frozen dinners that cost $12 each. Gaming accessories, phone chargers, even clothing items from stores I'd never set foot in. All purchased with cash, all off the books, all funded by money that was supposed to be going toward our future together. The worst part was remembering all the times she'd made me feel like the bad guy for questioning Griffin's lack of contribution. He's family, she'd say. He's going through a hard time. Meanwhile, she was secretly giving him more money every month than most people spend on car payments. I looked around our dining room, the room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties, where we'd made plans for home improvements and talked about maybe starting a family someday. Now it felt like a crime scene, evidence of betrayal scattered across the table I'd inherited from my grandfather. $6,000. Gone. Handed over to a man who'd never even said thank you, who treated our house like a hotel and me like an inconvenience. And all while my wife looked me in the eye and told me we needed to be more careful with money. That's when I heard Griffin coming downstairs, probably looking for lunch that someone else would pay for. I quickly gathered up the statements and receipts, but I didn't hide them. I was done hiding anything. It was time for some truth. By 4 p.m., I'd made my decision. I called Oakwood Commons, an apartment complex I'd always liked on the east side of town. Clean, quiet, reasonable rent, and most importantly, no freeloading man-children allowed. They had a one-bedroom available immediately. I drove over, signed the lease, and paid the deposit with money from a savings account Talia didn't know about, my emergency fund that had become my escape fund. When I got back home, Griffin was in the kitchen making himself a sandwich with the good lunch meat I'd bought for my work week. He barely looked up when I walked in, just nodded like I was the hired help returning from errands. I went upstairs and started packing. Not everything. I didn't want this to look like some dramatic storm out that Talia could dismiss as a tantrum. Just the essentials. My work clothes, some casual stuff, my laptop, phone charger. My father's toolbox from the garage, the one thing in this house that actually meant something to me. My guitar, which I hadn't played in months because Griffin's constant gaming made it impossible to think, let alone make music. Everything fit in 2 duffel bags and a small box. 15 years of marriage, and the stuff that really mattered to me could fit in the back of my truck. That should have been depressing, but honestly, it felt liberating. Griffin wandered into the kitchen around the time I was loading my second trip to the truck. He glanced at me carrying my guitar case, and actually paused his phone scrolling for a second. "Something going on?" he asked, like he was asking about the weather. "Yeah, just taking some space," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He shrugged and went back to his phone. "Cool, man. See you later." That was it. No questions about why I was moving out. No concern about what this meant for his living situation. No acknowledgement that maybe his behavior had contributed to this moment. Just a casual see you later, like I was going to grab beer from the store. Before I left, I wrote a note and placed it next to the coffee maker where Talia would definitely see it when she got home. I kept it simple. I'm done being disrespected in my own home. I found the bank records. I know about the $5,800. When you're ready to be honest and rebuild this marriage, with trust and respect, call me. Until then, I need peace. Read. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking around at the home I'd worked so hard to build and maintain. The cabinets I'd installed myself. The appliances I'd saved up for. The life I'd been so proud of just 18 months ago. None of it felt like mine anymore. I grabbed my keys, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The apartment was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like I was driving to another planet. For the first time in over a year, I was going somewhere that was completely mine. No Griffin's gaming noise, no tension, no walking on eggshells. Just peace. My phone started ringing around 7:30. Talia's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By 9 o'clock, she'd called 12 times and sent 6 increasingly frantic texts. I turned off my phone and opened a beer. The good stuff, not the cheap crap Griffin preferred. Tomorrow I'd deal with whatever came next. Tonight, I was just going to sit in my own space and remember what it felt like to be comfortable in my own skin. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. 3 days later, I was sitting in my new apartment, actually enjoying my morning coffee in complete silence, when someone started pounding on my door like the building was on fire. Through the peephole, I could see Talia standing in the hallway, mascara streaked down her face, still in yesterday's clothes. I opened the door, and she practically collapsed into my arms, sobbing like her world had just ended. Which, apparently, it had. "He's gone, Reed," she gasped between tears. "Griffin's gone. He took everything." I led her to my couch, where I could sit without permission, and waited for her to calm down enough to tell me what happened. The story came out in broken pieces between sobs and hiccups. Griffin had vanished sometime Tuesday night, cleaned out her jewelry box, including her grandmother's ring that she'd been saving to pass down someday, emptied her personal checking account, the one I didn't have access to, the one where she'd apparently been stashing money for months, took her laptop, her iPad, even some of the good kitchen appliances we'd gotten as wedding gifts. "The bank called this morning," she said, wiping her nose with tissues I handed her. "We're 30 days from foreclosure, Reed. 30 days. I thought I could handle the mortgage payments myself, but with all the other bills. Of course, she couldn't handle the mortgage. She'd been bleeding money to Griffin for over a year, and without my income, the math just didn't work. Simple economics that she'd apparently never bothered to calculate. I called his phone," she continued. "Disconnected. I drove to every place he might go. Nothing. It's like he just disappeared." I sat there listening, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but a kind of sad clarity. This was always going to be how it ended. Griffin was never going to get his life together, never going to become a contributing member of society. He was a predator who'd found the perfect mark in his guilt-ridden sister, and now that the well had run dry, he'd moved on to his next victim. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. "You were right about everything. I should have listened. I should have supported you instead of him." She reached for my hand. "Please come home. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll pay you back every penny. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please don't leave me." I looked at this woman I'd loved for 15 years, broken and desperate, and finally seeing the truth about her brother. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to fix everything like I always had. But a bigger part of me remembered lying on that couch, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "I'm sorry too," I said gently. "But I already did leave. This isn't a trial separation, Talia. This is me choosing peace over chaos." The look on her face told me she finally understood. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. 6 months later, I ran into Jasper, Talia's cousin, at the 24-hour fitness downtown. We'd always gotten along pretty well, and he was one of the few family members who'd never bought into Griffin's victim act. He was finishing up on the bench press when he spotted me doing deadlifts. "Reed, man, good to see you," he said, toweling off his face. "You look good, brother. Really good." I felt good too. Better than I had in years, actually. The stress weight I'd been carrying around my midsection had melted off. I was sleeping through the night again. I'd even started playing guitar again, something I'd forgotten I missed until I didn't have to compete with Griffin's constant gaming noise. "Thanks, man. How's everyone doing?" Jasper's expression got a little awkward. "Well, Talia's hanging in there. She's renting a room from her friend Michelle, working double shifts at 2 different dental offices. It's tough, but she's making it work." I nodded. I'd heard through mutual friends that she'd lost the house, just like she'd predicted. Part of me had felt bad about that, but not enough to go back and fix someone else's mess again. "And Griffin?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Jasper shook his head with disgust. "Dude's a ghost. Turns out he pulled the same scam on half the family. Hit up Uncle Pete for $3,000, borrowed money from our cousin Sarah, even convinced Grandma Ruth to loan him her emergency fund. Nobody's seen him since he cleaned out Talia's accounts. The family had finally seen what I'd been seeing for 15 months. Griffin wasn't a victim of circumstances. He was a professional parasite who'd perfected the art of finding people who felt guilty enough to support his lifestyle. Talia had just been his longest con. "Everyone feels pretty stupid now," Jasper continued, "especially after hearing what he put you through. Nobody blamed you for leaving, man. We all figured you'd stuck it out longer than most guys would have." That night, I sat on my couch, my actual couch, in my actual living room, where nobody questioned my right to exist, and thought about the conversation. No part of me missed the chaos. No part of me regretted choosing my own peace over someone else's drama. I'd built a life where I didn't need permission to be comfortable in my own space. My weekends were mine. My money went toward things I wanted and needed. My home was quiet when I wanted quiet. And if I felt like cranking up some music, there was nobody there to complain about it. Every now and then, usually on Sunday mornings when I was drinking my good coffee and reading the paper without interruption, I'd smile and think about that night I found my clothes dumped on the couch. It had felt like the end of everything at the time. Turned out, it was just the beginning of getting my life back. Some people called it selfish. I called it self-respect. And for the first time in years, I was genuinely happy with the man looking back at me in the mirror.